Nobody talks about quiet men like this. They talk about confidence. They talk about hustle. They talk about being louder, bolder, more visible. But nobody talks about the man who sits in the back of the room, says almost nothing, and somehow makes everyone else feel like they need to prove something. That man isn't shy. He isn't weak. He isn't waiting his turn to speak because he's scared. He's watching. And what he sees, most people never do. By the end of this video, you'll understand why quiet men carry a kind of power that loud men never will. Not confidence you perform, power you don't have to explain. Here's why this matters. If you're a man who's naturally quiet, you've probably been told your whole life that something's wrong with you. Told to speak up, told to be more outgoing, told that silence is something to fix. But what if silence was never the problem? What if it was the one thing you were never supposed to give away?
Let's start with something most people get backwards. Quiet men aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they've learned that most words don't need to be said. There's a difference. One comes from fear, the other comes from control. A man who talks constantly is often trying to convince the room of something, convince them he's smart, convince them he's important, convince them he belongs. A quiet man doesn't need the room to confirm anything. He already knows who he is. That's the first thing nobody tells you. Silence isn't the absence of confidence. It's confidence that doesn't need an audience. But here's what most people miss. Quiet men make other people uncomfortable, not because they're cold, because they're unreadable. In a world where everyone performs their emotions out loud, a man who keeps his thoughts to himself becomes a mirror. People project onto him. They assume he's judging them. They assume he's angry or arrogant or hiding something. Really, he's just thinking. But thinking without narration unsettles people who are used to noise. This is where things start to get interesting, because the same quality that makes people uneasy around a quiet man is the exact quality that makes them trust him more once they get past the discomfort. Loud men are easy to read and easy to forget. Quiet men are harder to read and impossible to forget. Think about the people who've actually influenced your life. Chances are it wasn't the loudest person in the room. It was someone who said less but meant more. Someone whose words carried weight because they didn't waste them. That's not an accident. That's psychology. Human beings are wired to pay more attention to scarcity. When someone talks all the time, their words lose value. Every sentence blends into the last one. But when someone speaks rarely, every sentence matters. People lean in, they remember it. This is one of the quiet reasons silence commands respect, even when nobody can explain why. Now, here's the part that matters. Quiet men are often mistaken for passive men. That's the biggest misunderstanding of all. Passive means avoiding conflict out of fear. Quiet means choosing your battles because you understand the cost of every one of them. A passive man stays silent because he's scared of the outcome. A quiet man stays silent because he already knows the outcome and he's decided it's not worth his energy. There's a version of every man who wants to react to everything, every insult, every disrespect, every small provocation. The loud version of masculinity says fight back immediately, prove your strength, don't let anyone disrespect you. But real strength looks different. Real strength is watching someone try to provoke you and choosing not to give them the reaction they're hoping for. That's not weakness, that's control. And control, more than aggression, is what actually earns respect. Few people realize this, but almost every regret a man carries came from a moment he reacted too fast. Words said in anger, decisions made in emotion,
relationships damaged because silence felt harder than speaking in the moment. The quiet man has already learned this lesson, sometimes the hard way. He knows that most situations don't need his opinion. Most arguments don't need his voice. Most chaos doesn't need his energy. He's not avoiding life, he's protecting it.
This is where the deeper truth starts to show itself. Quiet men aren't just controlling their words, they're controlling their emotional exposure. Every time you speak, you reveal something: your mood, your insecurity, your need for approval. A man who talks constantly without realizing it is handing out pieces of himself all day long. By the end of the day, there's nothing left that feels private. A quiet man protects that privacy, not out of secrecy, but out of self-respect. He understands that not everyone deserves access to his thoughts. Not everyone has earned his reaction. Not everyone gets to see what he's really feeling. This is where things become interesting, because in a world obsessed with expressing everything, the man who holds something back becomes rare, and rare things get noticed. Rare things get remembered. Rare things, without even trying, become powerful. Psychology reveals something surprising here. Studies on perception consistently show that people associate restraint with intelligence and status, even when they can't explain why. We assume the quiet person in the room knows something we don't. We assume they're thinking 3 steps ahead. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're just tired of proving themselves to people who were never going to understand anyway.
But here's the twist most people never expect. Being quiet isn't always strength. Sometimes it's a wound wearing a mask. Some men go silent not because they've mastered themselves, but because somewhere along the way they were taught it wasn't safe to speak. A father who dismissed their feelings, a mistake that taught them expression leads to punishment, a heartbreak that taught them vulnerability leads to loss. That kind of silence isn't power, it's protection built from pain. And there's a real difference between a man who chooses silence and a man who's hiding inside it. The real reason this matters is because most quiet men are somewhere in between, part strength, part scar tissue. And the work isn't to become louder. The work is to figure out which parts of your silence are serving you and which parts are keeping you small.
That's the deeper insight most people never talk about. Silence can be a weapon or a wall. The weapon protects your energy. The wall protects your fear. And only you know which one you're building. This is the part that changes everything. The quiet men who actually become powerful, the ones people remember, respect, and trust, are the ones who learn to speak when it counts. They're not silent all the time, they're selective. They know when to hold back, and they know when holding back would cost them more than speaking up. That's the real skill, not silence itself, the judgment behind it. Because a man who never speaks is just as unbalanced as a man who never stops. The goal was never to disappear. The goal was to stop wasting your voice on things that don't deserve it, so that when you do speak, people actually listen.
Here's what most people never realize about themselves. If you're the quiet man in most rooms, you've probably spent years feeling like something was missing, like you needed to be different, louder, more visible, more like everyone else who seemed to move through life so easily. But maybe nothing was ever wrong with you. Maybe you were just early to a kind of self-control most men don't find until they've lost something important. Early to understanding that peace matters more than proving a point. Early to knowing that respect isn't demanded, it's built quietly over time through actions that speak louder than anything you could say. The world will keep rewarding noise in the short term, but over a lifetime, it's the quiet men, the ones who master their reactions, protect their energy, and choose their words with intention, who end up respected the most. Not because they were loud enough to be noticed, because they were strong enough not to need to be. If this hits something in you, you already know it.
You've felt this your whole life, even if you never had the words for it until now. Sit with that for a second before you scroll to the next thing. And if you want to understand more about why silence and self-control shape a man's entire life, there's another video on this channel that goes even deeper into that. Watch that one next. It might explain more about yourself than you expect.